Lynn Pearson was beloved in my home growing up. My mum loved her poetry because Carolyn could put words around feelings Mormon women carried, but didn't always know how to express. So when Lynn Pearson died a couple of weeks ago at 86, I didn't want to turn her death into thinking about why church discipline and institutional policies gets one person excommunicated and another one not. Her life was far more interesting than that.
It was. She was a poet, a playwright, performer, feminist, LGBTQ advocate, diarist, and one of the most recognizable Mormon writers of the last 60 years.
For generations of Mormons, especially Mormon women, including my mum, she understood the world they were living in.
Hello, Eternal Family. Welcome to Post-Mormon Postmortem's Mormon Monday, where we look at something happening in Mormondom and ask what it tells us about the larger culture. I'm Jess.
And I'm Hannah. Carolyn Pearson died on Wednesday, July 29th, 2026, at age 86. Over nearly 60 years, she wrote more than 40 books and plays. People knew her through My Turn on Earth, I'll Walk With You, and Goodbye, I Love You, her memoir about her marriage to a man who was gay and caring for him as he died of AIDS. They also knew her writing about Heavenly Mother, Mormon patriarchy, the Equal Rights Amendment, and eternal polygamy. And some people, like my mum, knew her first as a poet. Carolyn Pearson grew up in a deeply Mormon family descended from Mormon pioneers. Mormonism shaped her imagination from the beginning. She studied theater at BYU, she taught at Snow College and BYU, and she worked as a screenwriter at BYU's motion picture studio. While she was performing in a BYU production of The Skin of Our Teeth, she met Gerald Pearson. He loved her, and he loved her poems. After they married, Gerald was determined to see her poetry in print, but publishers told him, look, poetry, it doesn't sell. So Gerald borrowed $2,000, created Trilogy Arts, and printed 2,000 copies of Carolyn's first poetry collection himself. That book was Beginnings. The BYU bookstore took 20 copies on consignment. Carolyn said she expected that the books that were stacked in their apartment, stacked under their bed, and stacked in her dad's garage to last for years. But after one day, the buyer from the BYU bookstore called to ask whether they had any more copies, and Beginnings eventually sold more than 150,000 copies.
That is such a huge number for a book of poetry that the publishing industry had basically just preemptively dismissed.
Right, yeah. Her poetry was really accessible, but she was not a simplistic thinker. She wrote about children, motherhood, faith. She wrote about uncertainty and growing older, being a woman, and finding meaning in ordinary life. She knew Mormon women's expectations, the vocabulary, the theology, family structure, and private questions because she lived inside that very same world. Her poem said, I see this too. I felt this too, and here are words for it.
She continued writing poetry throughout her life. Her collections included The Search, The Growing Season, A Widening View, Women I Have Known and Been, and Finding Mother God.
One of her best-known poems from the collection Beginnings is Day Old Child. And when I was a kid, I loved that poem that my mum had rewritten in her book of like the special poems that were keepsakes to her. She had like a little notebook that she would copy them into. And I recently reread it, and I have to share the handwritten inscription in my secondhand copy of the book that I hadn't really paid any attention to till the other day. But if this does not speak to the influence that Carolyn Pearson had, I don't know what does. The inscription is from August 1986, and it says, Dear friend, may you enjoy this book as I have, and be inspired by this beautiful woman's spirit as I have. These are all my favorite poems. I especially like Day Old Child on page 38. Also, when you read The Friend on page 64, please think of me. I love you, Jamie. Take care of yourself for me. Your sister, Leslie. So this is like the influence from ordinary Mormon women.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty great. I mean, Carolyn Pearson was already a major figure in Mormon culture long before she became known for her advocacy. In 1971, she wrote The Order is Love with composer Lex de Azevedo, based on the Mormon United Order community in Orderville, Utah. In 1977, she and Lex created My Turn on Earth.
If you grew up Mormon in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, there's a good chance My Turn on Earth was part of your childhood. Children leave heaven, come to earth, and try to remember that love is the treasure they're here to find. It turned premortal life, agency, choices, and returning home into something children could sing and perform. And there is nothing more Mormon than that.
There isn't. Carolyn also wrote the words to I'll Walk With You, which is still in the church's childhood songbook. Its message is simple. When someone is treated as different, you stay beside them.
Carolyn said that when she wrote that song, she was thinking about children who would eventually discover that they were gay and they would have to negotiate that difference inside Mormonism. She knew how difficult that would be for them.
Yeah.
She had a silly side too. She wrote the Model Mormon Mother's Notebook and I'm Still a Hot Babe, but Now It Comes in Flashes. And that is peak Cracker Barrel humor. She could love Mormonism, grieve it, challenge it, and make fun of it within the same body of work. And that huge range is part of why people trusted her. Carolyn described herself as having been born into women's issues. God was presented as male, church authority was male, scriptures centered men. Mormon girls were told that motherhood was their divine purpose, while decisions about authority, doctrine, money, and anything else considered worthwhile remained in the hands of men. Her writing about women came out of that world. In 1973, she published Daughters of Light, a collection of stories about Mormon women, followed in 1975 by The Flight and the Nest. She also supported the Equal Rights Amendment while the church was actively working against it and trying to thwart something called an Equal Rights Amendment. And she continued advocating for those rights decades afterwards.
Yeah. Her most ambitious work on the feminine divine was Mother Wove the Morning. Carolyn wrote and performed the one-woman play herself, portraying 16 women from different cultures and periods of history, all searching for the female face of God. She produced it herself and eventually performed it more than 300 times for audiences from many religious traditions.
Mormonism contains the idea of a heavenly mother. But if you grew up Mormon and you are honest, you will admit that she is almost entirely absent. Mormon women are told that becoming like her is their eternal destiny, while receiving almost no information about who she is, what she does, or whether her children can speak to her. Can she speak to her children? Does she listen when they speak to her? Carolyn spent her life searching for Mother God. In 2020, she published Finding Mother God, a collection of poems about the divine feminine. She wanted more than simply adding a woman to the existing structure. She wanted men and women to stand as equal partners.
Carolyn said that she was born into women's issues and she married into gay issues. Before they married, Gerald had told her that he had previous sexual relationships with and attraction to men, but they loved each other. Gerald wanted a wife and children, and they believed repentance, marriage, and love could make it work. Carolyn later wrote, quote, "We gave each other the best we had." They had 4 children, but after 12 years of marriage, they accepted that they couldn't continue. They divorced in 1978 and stayed friends. Several years later, Gerald was diagnosed with AIDS. And this was in the early 1980s when AIDS was surrounded by fear, misinformation, and open contempt for gay men. There were people dying of AIDS who were abandoned by their families, their churches, and communities. But Carolyn welcomed Gerald into her home. She cared for him and sang to him as he lay dying on her couch. He died in 1984. Carolyn initially had no intention of publishing their story. But she eventually decided her family's experience could help people understand something that they had been taught to fear. Random House published Goodbye, I Love You in 1986. And the book brought Carolyn to national television, including The Oprah Winfrey Show and Good Morning America.
Goodbye, I Love You let readers see Gerald Pearson as a whole person. Gerald was a husband, father, singer, friend, and someone Carolyn continued to love after their marriage ended. His life could not be reduced to a warning about sin or his death to a punishment. The book also showed the consequences of teaching gay people that heterosexual marriage could cure them. Carolyn and Gerald Pearson entered that marriage sincerely trying to follow what they believed God and the church wanted for them and required of them. Their love and their family were very real, but so was the damage. Carolyn's work for gay Mormons continued for the rest of her life. In 2006, her play Facing East premiered in Salt Lake City. It follows Mormon parents standing at the grave of their gay son after he has died by suicide. In 2007, she published No More Goodbyes, Circling the Wagons Around Our Gay Loved Ones, which collected stories of rejection, broken relationships, and suicide. Carolyn asked Mormon families, please choose your children.
Yeah. That sounds obvious now, and it should have been obvious then. And unfortunately, it still needs to be said. Her stories helped believing Mormon parents recognize that their gay children needed love, safety, and a home. She reached people who might never have listened to an activist they saw as hostile to the church because she spoke their language. In 2016, Carolyn published The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy. The church had ended new plural marriages more than a century ago, but eternal polygamy remains built into Mormon sealing practices. A widowed man can be sealed to another woman while remaining sealed to his first wife. A widowed woman generally cannot be sealed to more than one man. So for women who believe these sealings continue after death, the question is pretty obvious. What does that mean for their own marriages in eternity?
Carolyn had carried that fear since she was a teenager. A seminary teacher had described polygamy as God's highest form of marriage and taught that righteous women would eventually become unselfish enough to embrace it. Carolyn said she cried over that idea because it seemed to her it confirmed that God valued men more than women. Decades later, one of her elderly cousins told her she was afraid that her dead husband had already taken another wife in heaven. And Carolyn recognized that same pain in her cousin as she had felt as a girl and started analyzing the repercussions, right? The way that polygamy continues to haunt Mormon women because the doctrine was never clearly rejected. It remains in scripture, temple sealings, history, and crucially, in expectations about the next life.
Yeah, so she was asking the church to disavow that doctrine completely.
She wanted church leaders to acknowledge what the doctrine had done to women and remove eternal polygamy from Mormon theology, where it is very firmly placed. Carolyn Pearson's relationship with the church never fit neatly into the categories that we humans are fond of using. She remained culturally and spiritually connected to Mormonism, and she openly rejected harmful teachings about women and LGBTQ people. In one of her final major interviews, she described the church as, quote, a strange, beautiful, wonderful, bizarre church, close quote. I love Carolyn Pearson, and I part ways with her there. I disagree that the church is beautiful or wonderful, but her relationship with Mormonism makes sense to me.
She once said she would rather be a poet than a prophet. A poet notices, listens, and finds language for something other people feel but haven't been able to say. So, Hannah, when you think about Carolyn Pearson, what do you think her greatest contribution was?
Kind of what you just said. She articulated things that other people might have had difficulty saying, and she didn't deny the harm of Mormonism, even while she stayed. I mean, just to put it into context, when I say my mum loved her poetry, My mum had 4 kids in less than 3 years, and she was deeply depressed in the way that only Mormon women or women in high control religions who are at home with a litter of children can recognize. And that's what she gave my mum, like someone who saw her and what she was going through. And I imagine thousands of other Mormon women might say the same.
Yeah, I agree. Her work reached people inside the church, outside the church, and everywhere in between.
Yeah. She spent nearly 60 years writing and leaves a record of one woman insisting that love and truth could survive honest examination.
Carolyn Pearson called herself a freelance philosopher.
She also kept 2 bumper stickers that she said explained her pretty well. One said, "Loving kindness is my religion." The other said, "Question authority." She spent her life doing both. Thank you, Carolyn Pearson.
And thanks to you all for spending your Monday with us.
You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Postmormon Postmortem, online at postmormonpostmortem.com, and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also email us at postmormonpostmortem@gmail.com. We'll be back on Wednesday with an episode of What Do You Know Wednesday. Until then, Jess, I am sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.
I am sorry for what I said when I was Mormon too.